This is Ted Goldsboro with Living History. On our second segment, today we have Nolan Atkinson and Maryam Phillips with us, and we're talking about affordable housing in Lower Merion Township. We had left off with talking about two women. One was a white woman. I thought she was African American, but she was a white woman named Margaret Collins, who was raised in Bryn Mawr, and another woman, an African American, who was from Radnor Township named Maisie Hall. And Nolan, I wonder if you could tell us the difference in how Margaret Collins foresaw getting integration in housing versus the way you saw it.
Well, and I don't know a lot, or don't recall a lot about Margaret Collins. You've refreshed my recollection a lot this morning, but I believe that she was very much interested in integrating neighborhoods and what I would call fair housing kind of issues, and that she would work very hard to get African Americans to move into a neighborhood, and did that quite successfully. That's a little bit different from where I concentrated my efforts. You're still in the 60s and 70s. My concentration was really community development and looking to take an area which had shown a great deal of decline and revitalize it, and housing obviously is a part of that revitalization. It's both are very important. What Maryam Collins did, Margaret Collins, excuse me, and certainly the ability of anyone to purchase a home where they wanted to has now been defined by our Supreme Court as a fundamental legal right. But that was something that required a lot of work, and she deserves a lot of credit for it.
Any thoughts, Maryam?
I'm really at the end of the spectrum in terms of, concentrating my efforts more recently. So,
Okay.
All of us who work on things like this today are building on the efforts of those who came prior to us. So,
When you were a commissioner, could you tell us about the project of getting those houses at West Spring and Ardmore Avenue? What were the steps? How did you do that?
Well, with regard to the 16 houses, that was really, the township was very helpful from somewhat of a standby position, but they did not have the legal authority to pay the bills or to get involved directly. So by indirect methods, they were extremely supportive and are accomplishing that. Largely, that was a community effort. And then we worked with an organization in Philadelphia Council for Community Advancement, which had their executive director, Wilson Good. And that was when I learned an awful lot about how you deal with the housing agencies and getting the federal funds to actually build the condominiums. It was a 2 or 3 year long project, which seemed somewhat long, but there were a lot of hands helping to make that work. That was unlike building Ardmore House, which came in the early 80s, 10 years later, because there, the key element to making that plan work were the air rights over the Ardmore Avenue parking lot. And that was something that was owned by Lower Merion Township. And so the issues were much different in getting that accomplished. There was a lot of federal money in that as well. And I think I may have told you when I was here before that the commissioners met 3 times in the late 70s before they ultimately approved that development, because it required the decision of the board that this was what was going to be there. So that was very different than the 16 condominiums.
Mm-hmm. In reading literature, was getting HUD money important for your first project? Did that help push it along?
Getting money from the federal government for the 16 condominiums was absolutely essential. What they did is they insure loans. They don't actually write you a check.
Oh, okay. Okay, they back you up.
Yes, they back you up.
Oh, I thought it just handed you a check.
No.
Oh, okay. Was there, no, this is a rhetorical question. There was some opposition to getting that federal money in the local press.
There was opposition, but there was much more opposition to building Ardmore House. There was significant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There was significant opposition. There were people who were worried about having projects in Lower Merion and degrading the neighborhood, and there was significant opposition there. That required some real leadership from commissioners. That was not one of those commissioner votes that everybody was unanimously in favor. As I said, there were 3 township meetings, and in the first, whether or not to build Ardmore House, the vote was 7-7. And so it was postponed until the next meeting. It was not until the 3rd meeting that votes moved in favor of building it.
I hadn't realized that. I love this picture, which you were kind enough to share. And the only reason to show it is to show how many years have transpired between when you were a young commissioner and today. This is
that picture there was taken in 1977 when I was running for my 2nd term as commissioner in Lower Merion.
So you'd had 4 years?
I'd had 4 years, yes.
And this shows, I believe this is correct if I got my bearings right. This is the corner, because here's the Ardmore Avenue playground, here's Ardmore Avenue, and this is Spring. So I believe that the houses went into the space?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
The Mainline, well, there were 2 papers at the time, the Mainline Times and the Mainline Chronicle. And the Mainline Chronicle was, the editor was a man named Ben Kramer, and he often seemed reactionary. So public housing not wanted in 1977. The Mainline Times was more in favor of that. And then in 1977, I guess that's after your 3 votes. No, that was on Ardmore House, so that's different.
As I say, in Ardmore House, that was where you had the fights.
Okay.
And the reason was very simply, we owned the land for the 16 condominiums. We, being the Ardmore Community Development Corporation, had acquired the land, had raised it. So we had the ability then to do what was ever within zoning to build however we wanted. And so the next was to get the funding through federal programs.
That's an interesting point. Could affordable housing today be helped if we had nonprofit organizations who could go around with money and buy property and then develop it if it fit in the zoning?
I think the best answer is yes. I'm going to yield to Maryam to amplify that. My view is we could, as I believe you mentioned earlier in the show, There's not a lot of land available. It's awfully expensive. And those are the key factors. If you can't get land that you can acquire at a very small sum, you're not going to be able to build houses. Because developers can't can't do anything.
The numbers don't work.
The numbers don't work at all.
Maryam?
Yeah, I think the township is very fortunate to have the Lower Merion Affordable Housing Corporation as a nonprofit partner, if you will, in the disbursement of community development funds for housing initiatives. So as an entitlement community, housing and affordable housing is a really high priority for Lower Merion. But as Commissioner Atkinson just said, the township is not going to be involved in creating housing efforts. It's not a developer. So by being able to forward community development block grant funding to a nonprofit like Lower Merion Affordable Housing, some of these initiatives can occur with a nonprofit partner where the profit is completely taken out of the motivation, but the property values and market rates on properties are still high. So it's required a lot of creative thinking, and I think the home purchase program is a real tangible showing of creative thinking that way.
Now our first segment is done here, and we'll hope to have another show on this. And let's start with those condominiums back in the 70s. And this is Ted Goldsboro signing off on this show with Maryam Phillips and former Commissioner Nolan Atkinson. And I'm very grateful to them both for coming and discussing this topic, which I find very interesting. And so until our next show, we're signing off.